From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
Welcome to All Things with Kim Strassel, and this week we have a guest uniquely positioned to talk about Joe Biden as he prepares to leave office. Kentucky Republican James Comer is returning to the 119th Congress as chair of the House Oversight Committee. That committee, the past few years, conducted an in-depth probe into the Biden family business, focused very much on the business deals transacted by Joe Biden's son, Hunter. And Mr. Comer has written an entire book on the findings, as well as the complex process that goes into oversight. It's entitled All the President's Money, Investigating the Secret Foreign Schemes That Made the Biden Family Rich. And it is out today. Congressman, congratulations on the book.
Well, thank you very much.
Democrats are obviously having their own conversation about Biden and his legacy in the wake of their defeat this last election. His influence on the party, the role his refusal to leave played in their outcome. But as someone who has done this the last 2 years, looked at this investigation, what do you think Joe Biden's real legacy deserves to be as he leaves office?
I think his legacy will be that he was the most corrupt president we've ever had. He's one of the most dishonest, if not the most dishonest presidents we've ever had. You go back to the debate between he and Trump in 2020 when the laptop became public and he said that it was Russian disinformation when he knew that wasn't true. He said that he never knew what his son did for a living, that he never met any of the people that his son received money from, and that none of the money that his son received ever happened while he was in office, when in fact, after our investigation, I can say that Joe Biden met with nearly every scoundrel that wired the Biden's money. Most of the money, in fact, happened while Joe Biden was vice president, and that he was an integral part of the Biden family influence peddling model. Once he would meet with these people, then days later, the family would start receiving a series of wire transfers that would then be laundered through a bunch of shell companies. And at the end of the day, when you talk about the Biden family business, we never could figure out what the business was. We never found a legitimate business. They didn't produce a good or service. They weren't registered as lobbyists. And at the end of the day, I think the American people saw through that. But it's a very difficult story to tell if you didn't have a high IQ in basic finance. So I know the Wall Street Journal readers understood it.
Well, the word you use there that I think is so important to me is this model, because I don't think we'd ever seen anything like this before. Thank goodness, by the way. And it's also difficult to explain. And I want to go into it a little bit. But before we get into the ins and outs of that investigation and some of your findings, I just want to ask you, what was your reaction, and were you in any way surprised when Joe Biden in early December pardoned Hunter of his felony convictions for tax evasion and for lying to the federal government on a gun forum, having promised that he would not issue such pardons?
No, I was not a bit surprised, because he's never been truthful with respect to his son and his brother and where his family made money. He's lied so many times that I wonder if he thinks the lies are the truth sometimes. But, you know, at the end of the day, if he hadn't pardoned Hunter, Hunter was going to be sentenced to prison days after that pardon was when he was going to be sentenced. He would have never been in court to begin with were it not for our investigation. You know, people say some of the criticism I received from the right was, well, no one was ever held accountable. Look, when we started the investigation in January 2023, the laptop was still Russian disinformation. We had to go from there to where we finally had pressure on Weiss to do something. And what Weiss charged Hunter on, remember, he was going to get that sweetheart plea deal, and the judge in Delaware rejected it. She rejected it mainly because the whistleblowers came forward from the IRS, Ziegler and Shapley. They would not have come forward were it not for our credible investigation and what all we had dug up thus far. They came forward, and then Congress sent the letter to the judge in Delaware saying, what you're trying to allow him to get a sweetheart plea deal on is just the tip of the iceberg of the crimes he committed. We believe he committed a violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. You know, the six banks said that he was money laundering. And then two IRS whistleblowers recently said that he never paid taxes on all the money that the Biden family took in, that the only thing that he was charged on really was not paying taxes with his Burisma money, and he got a W-2 on that. None of the money that he got from Romania and from China and from Kazakhstan. None of that money had a W-2 attached to it. And he just ran that through those LLCs and would, use the LLCs for his flamboyant lifestyle. He had prostitutes that, according to the IRS whistleblowers, he listed as employees in his LLC. He bought all of his groceries and his sports cars and, everything that he used for entertainment, he would write off on his LLCs to where at the end of the year, his LLCs showed they broke even. So what the Irish whistleblowers alleged, and I would confirm from my investigation, is he never paid a penny of taxes on the $27 million they took in. Plus, we found $8 million in loans that Hunter and Jim Biden received that they never paid back. And if you take a loan and you don't pay it back, then at some point, that's taxable income either for the loanee or the loaner. Somebody has to pay taxes on that, and nobody did.
Yeah. We're going to take a break. When we come back, more with House Oversight Chairman James Comer. Welcome back. I'm Kim Strassel here with Jim Comer, chair of the House Oversight Committee and author of the new book, All the President's Money. I think that you make a really, really important point here, which gets to the oversight function, which is the great service that you folks did. And we noted this in the editorial pages, is simply getting this information out there, which people would not have seen. And I just want to take a step back really quick, because as you are alluding to in some of this was an immensely complicated story. You lived it. I wrote about it. But there were stories about suspicious activity reports and foreign entities. You noted Burisma, CEFC. There was the entire drama going on with the U.S. attorney, David Weiss, depositions, banking reports, lies that were told by the media, the loans, laptops. There was a lot here, and your book documents all of it. And I do suggest that people read it if they really want to understand these ins and outs. But can you do this for me? Maybe step back, and you talked about that Biden family model. For some listeners who didn't watch all the ins and outs of all of this, what was that model that you uncovered, and why is it so concerning in terms of being perpetrated or being in place for a man who is the head of the executive branch?
Well, that's a great question. So the people who were wiring the money were all people who were in trouble. They were being investigated for fraud. The Russian oligarch couldn't get a bank to take her money because she had dirty money, and she was trying to keep it out of Russia so it wouldn't be seized as an asset. And she needed a bank in the United States. So everybody that wired them money were under investigation for some type of fraud or corruption in various countries around the world. So what the Biden business model was, is somehow the Bidens found these people, and Hunter would make contact with them, and he would convince them that his dad could help them. And then he would tell the crooks, I'll say, that were going to send him money, that my dad, I'm going to show you my dad, he's going to come here, but he's got to have plausible deniability. He's the vice president of the United States. He's going to come in and say hi. Don't talk to him about this specific problem. I'll deal with it. He knows what we're doing. So Joe would come in. He would either get on the phone, or they would have lunch, or he would stop by. They would shake hands, and Joe would pat him on the back and say, thank you for working with my son, and wink and a nod. And then he would leave. That would show Joe Biden was what I would call the closer of the deal. Then days later, a wire would happen from the people that were in trouble. The wire would begin with an LLC that would have partners like Devin Archer, or partners like Jason Galanis, or partners like Rob Walker. And the first initial receipt of that wire, then the partners, their only role in the deal I could see was they would get a cut from the initial money. And then if somebody got in trouble, it would be them. And that's what you saw with Devin Archer and with Jason Galanis. In one of the schemes, there were three equal partners, Galanis, Archer, and Hunter. Galanis went to jail. Archer's about to go to jail. And Hunter was never questioned by anyone in the federal government. So the associates is what the media called them, the business associates, even though it wasn't a legitimate business. Their role was to help filter that money through. And if things went bad, then they would take the fall. And then Hunter would get it and start laundering it, wiring it and transferring it through various LLCs to make it look like he had legitimate investment companies. And the bank said those were investment companies with no investments, meaning they were a shell company. And then they would send them down periodically in incremental payments to 10 different Biden family members. That's how the business model was. And what I put in the book that I don't think a lot of people realize, Hunter Biden's more intelligent than I think a lot of people on Fox News or Newsmax or some of the conservative outlets would claim. You know, you see the pictures of him all drugged out and things like that. But his first job was he was a fraud investigator for a credit card company in Delaware. I think he learned a lot about how to defraud from being a fraud investigator. And this business model that he had where he laundered the money through all these different shell companies, and a shell company is a fake company, if anybody doesn't know what that word means. This was very sophisticated. The two IRS whistleblowers said it was very sophisticated. And he's no dummy, and he's like the kid that spends all his time writing sheet notes when if he had just really tried to study, he might have done just as well on the exam. That's kind of the way the Bidens are. And that was the scheme. And look, you saw 2 times where Joe Biden gave speeches on corruption, one in Romania and one in Ukraine. Days later, money starts wiring into the Biden family account. In Ukraine, we know what happened there. Just a coincidence, according to Joe Biden, that he withheld foreign aid until the prosecutor fired the prosecutor that was investigating the Burisma company that his son was being paid for. So this was a scheme, and it was complex. And it was hard to explain because the names of the people wiring the money were hard to pronounce names in foreign countries. And the average person didn't know where Kazakhstan was or Romania was. And it was just hard to explain. But, you know, the book goes into detail. There's enough pages where I think people can get a very thorough understanding in the book, all the president's money, of where the money came from, who the people were, and how they pulled it off.
They definitely can if they read this. There is a great deal of very useful detail in the book. We're going to take one more break. When we come back, more with Jim Comer.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
Welcome back. I'm here with James Comer, head of the House Oversight Committee. One thing that you stress in the book that I think is also important, because what you're fundamentally talking about here is influence peddling, the definition of it in some ways. And you note, and I think this goes again to sort of the way Hunter thought about this, is that this is not a business dealing the way most Americans would think of it. There were no tangible assets. There wasn't like real estate was changing hands. All of this always seemed to be about Biden having a consulting position or a board position or a finder's fee position, hunting for deals for some foreign entity or something. But it did mean that there was no concrete transactions or business dealings to actually follow, correct?
That is correct. And if he wants to argue that he was a lobbyist for these foreign oligarchs, that might be legal, but you have to register for what's called a Foreign Agents Registration Act. And people that have done that, that's what they got General Flynn on. That's what they've gotten a lot of people on that took money from foreign entities for lobbying purposes or whatever. If you don't register, you go to prison. And every single person that's been nailed for receiving much less amounts of money than Hunter Biden received ended up going to prison. But again, Hunter Biden never spent 1 second in prison. And, you know, what we learned in the investigation, too, and this shows, you know, how much smoke there was around the Bidens. There were multiple Department of Justice investigations of the Biden family from multiple different jurisdictions. There was investigation by the IRS. There was an investigation by the FBI. And there was an investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission, all for different things. Now, how many people in the history of America have been under investigation in a president's immediate family? I would argue there's never been anyone. You know, Bill Clinton had a brother that had a drug charge or something like that. Jimmy Carter's brother had some financial issues. But at the end of the day, the entire Biden family, at some point, both his living children, both his brothers, their wives, if you just Google their names, and of course, Google has it hid, you have to dig to about the 3rd page. They've all been cited for tax evasion. They've all had tax issues. They've had legal issues. They've been accused of lots of things, but none of them ever got prosecuted. And you see what happened to Donald Trump with just the weaponized judiciary going after him. He had legitimate businesses and he was very transparent about his transactions. And then here you got the Bidens that had no legitimate business. They still, to this day, have not said what the Biden business is. And the book says it. It's influence peddling. They were selling access to Joe to bad people in bad countries. And then the last thing, the biggest transaction they got was from China. And it was from a mysterious company called CEFC. And according to Tony Bobulinski, who was supposed to be in that deal, but they cut him out in the end, he learned that the CFC wasn't even a legitimate business in China, that it was this Chinese Communist Party, according to Bobulinski, bribing Joe Biden. I mean, that is an unbelievable thing to say, and yet the mainstream media avoided that. They didn't even mention that. If someone had said Donald Trump was bribed, someone that was inside on a deal with Trump from China, our biggest adversary, I think NBC and CBS and ABC would probably make mention of it in their nightly news, but no one did on the Biden.
Yeah, it strikes me that there were always sort of three scandals here. There's the one you're relating to that had to do with this Biden family business. Another one, and you've alluded to it as well, and you go through this in the book, is one of those federal investigations, one that was being run out of the Department of Justice under David Weiss, which did seem to have, according to whistleblowers who testified in front of Congress, some real roadblocks put up to it and its ability to truly investigate and then prosecute Hunter Biden. And then also, obviously, the media and their lack of interest in this story, but also then their willful misconstruing of what was going on along the way. I want to ask you one other thing, because I think this gets to the future. It's a little bit of a transition. I do want to ask you a question before we have to go about this next Congress. But you say in this book that this was the biggest public corruption scandal of your lifetime. And you talked about your goals, which one was to lay out the facts of it. But also, Congress works with legislative purpose. And you have come up with something, the Presidential Ethics Reform Act. And you have noted that this isn't an issue necessarily limited to Joe Biden. I know you gave an interview last year in which you talked about some concerns you had with some of Jared Kushner's business dealings. Where is that legislation? Should it be passed? And would Donald Trump, do you think, sign it?
Well, I think it should be passed. We tried to pass it last session, but Jamie Raskin didn't want to do it. And Jamie Raskin is the Democrat ranking member on my committee, and the bill would have had to gone through my committee. And, none of the Democrats supported the bill. I've got a few of the, Freedom Caucus guys on my committee. They vote no on every bill. It's very difficult to pass anything, but this should have been a bipartisan bill anyway. And Raskin didn't want anything to do with it. He trashed the bill. And then when Biden had the debate and did the disastrous debate, and he saw that Trump was going to win, then Raskin came back to the table and said, I would love to do the bill. And then when they put Kamala on the ticket, he lost interest again because he thought she was going to win. So, the Democrats only want ethics if it's a Republican administration. So now I think that if we pass the legislation, it'll have to go into effect with the next presidency, whoever that is. So I feel confident that Trump would want to do that. I haven't talked to him about it. I was with Trump this weekend at Mar-a-Lago, but I didn't get a chance to talk to him about that. So that's something that we'll be pursuing. It's not at the top of the list now because you've got a new administration coming in. So I think that hopefully it'll be something that at the end of this Congress that we can get through after we do the budget reconciliation and close the border and try to deport all the illegal criminals that are over here and all the priority issues first.
Just briefly, what does the legislation do?
It just increases disclosure. So if you've got any type of entity in a foreign country, then you have to disclose the revenue that's coming in. So when Joe Biden was vice president, there was never any disclosure that his son was getting all these foreign wires from. No one knew about the money from Romania. You knew about the money from China because it had been written about in Miranda Devine's book. It was in the laptop and all that. But the Romanian money wasn't. That was something that we discovered. People knew about the Porsche from Uzbekistan because of the laptop. But remember, the media said the laptop was Russian disinformation. So by the time we were able to prove that the laptop was real, then Donald Trump was out of office and Joe Biden had his own attorney general in. So it just significantly increases the disclosure and the transparency of what you have. I'm not going to say you can't do foreign transactions. Look, I'm just in the private sector. I own a bunch of farmland and I've had cattle. I would send cattle to Mexico. We send cattle different places and do things like that. Anyone that's going to be president, especially if they're a Republican, they're going to be probably in business. And if you're in business, then you've got international transactions. I don't want to say you can't, because if you say you can't have international transactions, then Donald Trump would be ineligible to be president. But you've got to disclose it and not hide it. And, when Trump ran for president, he bragged about his properties all over the world. And he campaigned on the fact that he was a businessman, and people wanted that. So it's okay to be in business and to have money. Just be truthful about it. Donald Trump was, and Joe Biden was not, because if you're taking money from China for no apparent reason, that should be a concern. And I'll close with this. I thought it was ironic that Christopher Wray went on 60 Minutes and said the biggest threat to America is China. I actually agree with that. But if he believed that, then why did he never have a problem with the Biden family taking $8 million from what I believe was straight from the government of China? There was no legitimate business in China. According to Bobulinski, it was just a bribe from the Chinese government. And the FBI, under Christopher Wray, knew this because they had the laptop a year before it became public. And when it became public, not only did they do the letter saying that, from the 51 intelligence officials, that this sure looks like Russian disinformation, we learned in our hearing that they were going to Twitter and Facebook and saying, look, this story's fixing to pop on a laptop from a political family. It sure looks like Russian disinformation to us. So Christopher Wray's FBI committed election interference to protect Joe Biden from the truth that his family took $8 million from China for no apparent reason, and then made the social media companies censor the stories from the New York Post and other outlets that wrote the truth about it. So I think Christopher Wray should be held accountable in some form or fashion, and him just being able to walk away with a big pension isn't good enough for me. Hopefully the next administration will do something about that.
Well, this is my last question, and it relates to what was going on at the FBI. One of the things I liked about your book is it really got into the details of how oversight is conducted. And for someone that's covered Washington a long time, even I learned some interesting things about how things work internally in Congress and in that process. Republicans now come in, and you're going to have a Republican in the White House. It's certainly going to change the cast a little bit about what kind of oversight you guys are doing. And I know that you're already busy at work. I believe already on Wednesday, tomorrow, you've got a full committee meeting on the problems with stay-at-home workforce created under Biden. But what else are going to be your priorities in this next Congress? Are you some of it going to be about trying to get a hold of things you couldn't when the Biden administration wouldn't give documents, and some of it new issues? What do you think your priorities are?
Well, obviously our priorities working with DOGE. That's going to come through our committee, whatever Musk and Ramaswamy come up with. The Oversight Committee, we have jurisdiction over a lot of what they want to do with respect to the size of the federal workforce and the number of unused buildings in Washington, D.C., and a lot of the information technology changes that need to be made to the software for the federal government, because our federal government gets ripped off every second by sending out improper payments to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars. We're going to be doing a lot with that, but I'm not going to walk away from the scandals of the Biden influence peddling. We still got a lot of documents that the National Archives never turned over. They tell us they'll turn it over when Trump becomes president. No, I find that odd. And of course they say, well, they can't turn it over because Joe Biden won't let them turn it over. I mean, that should be a huge story right there. So we've got a lot of stuff that we requested that we never got. We want to go back and review that. But obviously, our top priority is going to be working with the Trump administration to try to get spending under control and try to get our government more efficient.
Well, Chairman Comer, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on your book. One more time, it's All the President's Money, Investigating the Secret Foreign Schemes That Made the Biden Family Rich. It is out today. We want to thank our listeners who tune in every week. We'll be here next week. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to write to us, you can at pwpodcast@wsj.com.